This is Florida Power and Light CEO Armando Olivera in a visit to the Palm Beach Post. And Mr. Olivera will have some remarks for about 10 minutes, he says, and then we'll go to questions, some of which will be from the readers of the newspaper who have emailed them to us. So, Mr. Olivera, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Randy. What I'd like to do this afternoon is really give you a little bit of an overview of at least some of the issues that we think are important to our customers, and really to kind of update you to some extent since the last time I was here, which I think was last fall sometime. So the first is just the Gap Police wants to make sure that anybody who looks at this information for financial forecast understands that this is covered under the safe harbor provision. So I've done my duty for the Gap Police. And so with that, let me just take a minute and talk about the name change, since I've had a ton of questions about the name change. Said simply, FPL Group is no longer just a Florida company. It is a company that now has a really big footprint in the United States, now in Canada as well. And frankly, it's also a place where there's a strategy to expand in renewables, solar, wind. We've talked about that. We believe that the Nextera name, and a name that's not sort of geographic centered like FPL, is more representative of what the company means. We think, frankly, the strategy of Nextera helps the Florida Power and Light customers because it brings in the expertise that Nextera has in renewables. I don't think we could have done the solar projects that we have done without having that support and technical know-how that we have at Nextera. But fundamentally, it's no change at Florida Power and Light. So with that, I'll start with the regulatory side. Obviously, we were not happy with the outcome of the rate case. We now have the lowest allowed return on equity in Florida. We believe that our track record of reliability, cleaner emissions, and the lowest residential bills in the state, frankly, warranted something a little higher than that.
You might want to just take a minute and make sure that the people watching understand that when you say lowest return on equity, you basically mean that as a regulated monopoly, Florida allows you to have the smallest profit. Would that be a fair way of saying it?
It's mostly. I would just take slight variation and say it's really the cost our cost to raise equity. So when we build a facility, we don't generate enough cash flow to fund that from internally generated cash from the company. So say on $1 million investment, and these are sort of on gross numbers, on $1 million investment, we typically fund it with about 50%, so $500,000 of debt, and $500,000 of equity, which is the return that we have to pay shareholders for their investing the money at FPL. So when we're out competing for customers, we have to pay what is a competitive return on equity for those customers to be able to attract the capital to the business. So it is a cost, but I think I wanted to put it in kind of the broader context and customers should care because that is what funds a lot of the investments that we have made in the past and that we propose spending in the future. It's the things that have allowed us to do investments that generate benefits for the customers, both in terms of improving the efficiency of the fleet, which translates into lower fuel costs, and secondly, emissions, and keep making these plants have a lower emissions profile, which part of our core strategy. So, no, please, that was a good, I can very easily get caught up in our own internal jargon, so I welcome that. So when you look at sort of where we are, we are where we are today, but, the rate case is still technically not done, right? We filed a petition for reconsideration. mostly around technical issues. We couldn't reconcile all the mathematical computations, and so we said, give us some clarification on these. But however you do it, let's keep the rates and the revenue requirements the same. We are expecting a staff recommendation later on this week and a commission decision sometime after that, depending on when the staff rec comes out. Probably the pending issue before us is West County 3, which, as you know, it's just not far from here. The third unit
in western Palm Beach County.
It is the third unit at that site. It is scheduled to come in service the summer of 2011. Huge investment for us, about $900 million investment. I think we asked to get the regulatory treatment for that plant as part of the rate case. That request was denied. And so this plant has significant benefits for the customers. Again, they're fuel savings. Because it's a much more efficient plant, it generates a lot of fuel savings for the customers, somewhere between $650 and $750 million over the life of the plant. That's under the current fuel forecast, and the higher the fuel prices go, the greater the benefits that accrue to customers. So we've got to figure out a way to get cost recovery on that plant, and so we haven't decided what we're going to do. This kind of ties into when do we go back for rate requests, right? We could come in and ask for what is called a limited scope hearing. So you just go in and you ask for cost recovery on this. We could lump it into another rate case and say, allow us to get cost recovery on this. And by the way, please revisit the return on equity. We have not decided when we're going to go do that. We obviously are trying to put as much flexibility in the process as we can. We also can petition the Florida Supreme Court on the whole rate case decision. Once they weigh in on the petition for reconsideration, we can go to the Supreme Court if we feel that
they being the Public Service Commission.
Right. And so no decision has been made. I don't think we could sit out much longer than, say, 2012, 2013. But we're kind of taking one day at a time. We'd like to see the results of the petition for reconsideration and see how that comes out. And, we'd like to see if there's a way, if there's a possibility of a settlement or some negotiated way to get West County 3 to get the cost recovery for that. It's a pretty compelling case from a customer point of view, right? We've made the investment, generates a lot of fuel savings, a lot of savings for the customers. And we think it's important that the state continue to encourage making those kinds of investments. So let me speed it up because I know you're going to hold me to the 10-minute mark on this. If you just if you go to slide 8, we are continuing to invest in the infrastructure, and probably wouldn't surprise you that as we came out of the rate case decision in January, we had a lot of internal discussion about, do we keep doing the same thing or not? It's the right strategy for the customers, right? The things that we have been doing, we didn't get to where we are in terms of having the lowest bills in the state and in terms of having one of the cleanest fleets in the state by accident. We've been making these kinds of investments for a long, long time. And frankly, we've decided to continue with these projects with an expectation that over the long run, we're going to be able to get the right kinds of returns for our investors, the people who are funding these projects. And that, in turn, benefits our customers. So we've talked about West County. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But we announced that we were going to proceed with the modernizations, closest one, of course, being the Rivera Plant down the road. Again, these plants have financial benefits for customers. And in my mind, almost as importantly, they have huge environmental benefits. And so we are proceeding with those. I think we have done 3 solar projects. We would like to do more. These solar projects, when the third one is completed, we would have invested about $650 million in the projects. It represents about a quarter. And this is over the life of the project. So it's a little higher at the beginning, and then it goes down every year after that. So over the life of the projects, of these 3 projects, it represents about a quarter. We think it makes a huge amount of sense for us to continue to do more in Florida. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We're also continuing to do what we call the nuclear upgrades, which is essentially increasing the output of our 4 nuclear reactors, 2 in St. Lucie County, 2 in Miami-Dade County. They are very expensive projects, expected to cost between $2.1 and $2.3 billion, but they have huge benefits for the customers. I just had them do an analysis, had the team do an analysis recently, and if we had this 400 megawatts in total that they represent, in the last 5 years, customers would have saved $1.2 billion in fuel. So, again, just to remind you, we've talked about this in the past. Nuclear fuel.
Because it's gas and oil and other things, fossil fuels
exactly.
You're not buying.
Right. And this last 5 years, by the way, covers a period when gas was really high and gas was really low. Right. So I think that's as representative as anything. Because I know that whatever fuel price forecast we have, it's going to be wrong. But it gives me comfort when I look at spending this kind of money, whether our customers are going to get the benefit of it. And I believe that they are. I believe strongly that they are. I think enough on that. We continue to believe, though, that we can do a lot more solar projects. We've got about 565 megawatts of potential solar projects ready to go. And these are in sites around the state.
And for the purposes of the audience, 565 megawatts is...
It's a good-sized power plant.
Right.
It's a nice-sized power plant. So I think you know that we are great believers in renewables. We have really, anybody who would pay any attention to us, we've talked about why Florida should be doing a lot more of it. We think it's a good public policy. We love to see the legislature come out with really additional legislation that allows this to be done. So we'll see.
Do you think you've got an even better case for that and maybe more leverage in Tallahassee, given what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico with the oil leak?
I think, Randy, that it's a pretty compelling story. I think, and maybe certainly there is a lot of rethinking going on about the role of drilling and how much Florida wants to be tied to offshore drilling like that. So I like to think it is.
Okay.
In addition to that, we are proceeding with licensing the new nuclear plant. I think, we have delayed the in-service date of that plant for several reasons, one of which is lower demand. Secondly, gas prices have been low, so it makes the economics of the plant not as attractive. Third, the design that we and a lot of other utilities had chosen still doesn't have Nuclear Regulatory Commission approval, not expected until 2011. And fourth, frankly, we want to make sure that there's several companies that are ahead of us in building this plant, and we think that there's some benefit in being in the second wave of new nuclear plants. We've always been comfortable being in kind of the second wave. Let others learn sort of the lessons of kind of the first in kind. But all things being equal, we like nuclear. We think it makes a lot of sense for Florida, and we'd love to see more nuclear happen. We're in a slower schedule. Let's see what happens once we get the construction and operating license for it. And we'll make at that point, we'll make a decision at what speed we proceed.
And again, just so people are clear, obtaining the license doesn't necessarily mean that you will build them, right?
Correct. The license is good for 20 years. So once you get the license, you are sort of good to go. And you have 20 years to get the plant in service. I believe that this plant will happen sooner, not 20 years from now, but sooner than 20 years. But it may not happen in 2022, 2023.
And the current projection for how much the new nuclear facility would cost?
We have said $14 to $18 billion, but obviously the longer you delay the plant, the higher the cost. So conceivably the plant could cost more. Conversely, if we in this country make a commitment to nuclear, right, and the federal government says, we're going to build 20 plants, and the 20 plants are all going to be the same, they're going to be the same design, that could lower the cost significantly. So there's still a lot of moving pieces.
Almost a design build.
Absolutely.
Sort of
right. And you
proposition.
say, if you build it this way, if you build it this way, you build this design and you build it this way, you're sort of guaranteed to have a license and you can proceed with that. And by the way, the other issue is one of finances. That's a huge amount of money. I don't think we could raise the equity today to build a plant like this, not given kind of where we are from a regulatory fact that we've had a credit downgrade. We probably couldn't build this plant on our own anymore. So it would probably require government loans, some other mechanism if we were to do it today.
You have a site?
Yeah, this would be it would be an expansion of the Turkey Point facility.
South of Miami.
South of Miami, correct.
Is there any scenario in which you can see that FPL would not need this new nuclear facility?
I have a hard time coming up with one.
Okay.
Let me just turn and spend a few minutes talking about storm. I'm on slide 12. We have been since every year when it gets to this time, I always think about the 04 and 05 hurricane season. I'm sure you all do.
Don't we all?
At least any of you who are living here
Don't we all?
will remember that. And we have done a lot of work since then. We've put about $500 million really trying to improve what we call the hardening of the grid, both in terms of we've inspected a lot of poles, we've replaced many of our wood transmission structures to really more to be concrete or steel. We have strengthened our facilities that serve all major hospitals and acute care centers. We're frankly kind of a little bit ahead of our plan when we first started out doing this. There's always a balance that we try to achieve, right? We try to do all what we call the critical infrastructure facilities, 911 centers, police and fire, and so forth. And at the same time, we've been trying to make sure that there's enough space in there for what I call kind of the services that people need. If you recall, one of the issues we had in those hurricanes were, people couldn't get to a grocery store, they couldn't pump gas. It was just a kind of a horrendous situation. So we're trying to make sure that at least that we have hardened facilities in every major neighborhood that has at least one shopping center that has hardened facilities that hopefully either the lights will stay on or we can get back in service pretty quickly. But having said all of that, and since we're sitting here at the start of hurricane season, I should say that if we get a hurricane, there are going to be outages. There's no way to avoid that. I wish I could tell you that we can. Hopefully we're going to get the lights back on quicker, but I think it would be unrealistic for anybody to expect that there won't be extended outages. And if there's any message out of my being here today is we all have to be prepared for what we keep being told is going to be a very, very challenging hurricane season.
Now, you began this storm-proofing about 4 years ago, right? You've been the
Correct.
spring or summer of 2006. On the current schedule, when do you think you would be complete?
It depends how you define complete, right? If you define complete by sort of our hardening and completing all the inspections of all the poles, which we haven't completed yet, those are on an 8-year cycle, so that would be 2014 timeframe. But to be honest, we keep learning as we go through these, and we find that we continue to improve how we harden facilities. So if you look at what we were doing in 2006, we've gone back and learned and try to improve on that. So I think 2014 would be a milestone in the sense that you could say, inspected everything. We have no pole in the system that has not been checked and confirmed that it's structurally sound and so forth. But this is a system that's changing constantly. So I would say somewhere in that time frame, we'd say we at least have completed the first phase of what we said we were going to be. But when you live in this environment, and you live in I call it Hurricane Alley, this East Coast Tri-County area, we're always going to have issues. So with that, let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about Energy Smart Florida. Smart grid, as I think you probably know, it's an $800 million investment. It is supported by $200 million of a federal economic stimulus grant. Mm-hmm. And it's really a combination of the installation of smart meters on the grid, as well as a component that is what we call sort of automating the grid, that is putting intelligence in the grid that will allow faster restoration and faster diagnosis by diagnosing a problem faster, and in some cases using intelligence to automatically switch around so that the number of people who are without power is reduced significantly. We think that that is something that makes a lot of sense for our customers, that it will have a lot of benefits for our customers. But to be clear, the core piece of this is the Energy Smart meters, and 3/4 of the funds are really going to go towards the installation of these smart meters. And there's been a fair amount written about the smart meters. If I can just ask you to turn to the next page. And I'll tell you why we did it. We did the installation, and we were on track to do that before the economic stimulus dollars became available. But we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One, we think it's going to allow us to provide better reliability, so the customers will know, for example, when you're out of power. You don't have to call. Now, if you're certain lines, will know right away if you're without power, but not to this granular level. We think it's going to help us. Where we had this, by the way, we've had this in a few communities already. And when we had the cold weather, and as you know, we had a number of outages, we were able to go back and really quickly diagnose the issues with customers that were being served by a smart meter that were in areas that had a smart meter in them. So we think it makes a lot of sense. The other reason we're doing this, frankly, is because it generates operational savings. We're able to reduce some of our operating costs by doing this installation, and those savings ultimately
get to send people out to houses all the time.
And ultimately, those savings will flow back to customers in ways in terms of rates. So where we are is we'll be starting Palm Beach County later on this year, and we hope to be finished probably at the end of 2011. Having these meters deployed in Palm Beach County.
Will every customer have one?
Every residential customer will have one. There are a few commercial industrial customers that aren't going to have one, but they already have a lot of this technology in place. So if you're a residential customer, you will have one. And by the way, the third, of course, is you'll be able to access the information via the internet. There is a lot of discussion going on in what's called behind the meter, so that if you want to have it control your refrigerator and your water heater and any number of other appliances, the technology is there to do that. We're not sure how many people are going to do that. But suffice it to say, if you decide that you're never going to look on the internet and look at your energy consumption and all that, you will get benefits from this project, which to us was very important. And if you happen to be somebody that really wants to, and I think you guys have written about a couple of people who in Broward County who have used this and really have gotten a lot of benefit from doing it.
You mean that if I wanted to tell it not to heat my water at 2 o'clock in the morning, and between 2 and 6 in the morning, I can tell it to do that by the end of next year?
No, you won't have that. That you'll need more stuff on your side of the meter, on the other side of the meter.
I have to hook up a computer that'll eat up a lot of power to do.
Well, and frankly, some of that technology is, although appliance manufacturers are putting out, if you bought a new refrigerator in the last few years, chances are you already have that technology built into that refrigerator, and most people don't know that. But we haven't quite figured out and make sure this is all this new technology sometimes has trouble talking to each other. So the stuff in the meter has to be able to talk to the stuff in your refrigerator, for example. I think all those things will be overcome. There's some big players getting into the space, GE, Cisco, Google, and so forth. So we could spend the whole time talking about this, but let me move on in the spirit of staying within the time frame. So if you go to slide 17, we despite of everything that has really gone on this last year, I strongly believe that our customers have benefited from prior regulators' decisions, and I say that based on, if you look at the bills, our customers have the lowest bills in the state of Florida. We have saved a lot of money as a result of the investments in cleaner, more efficient technology, and we are going to continue to keep doing that through the investments in the modernizations and the upgrades. And we expect that our customers will continue to benefit from that. Lastly, when you look at the reliability by really all the measures, we have very high levels of reliability, top quartile nationally, and number one for outage restoration time. We're also very proud of our carbon footprint. It's better, significantly better than national average, and the things that we are doing, again, is going to help keep improving that environmental profile. So with that, I don't know how much time I took, but I hope I answered at least some of the questions that you had.
We were poaching some, so that's all right. Let me start by asking you about the decision now to renovate, upgrade, modernize the plants in Rivera Beach and Canaveral. After FPL was denied the rate request in January by the Public Service Commission, you canceled those projects.
Put them on hold.
Delayed them, okay. And then on the 30th of April, you sent out a release saying, following an in-depth analysis, the company determined that it is appropriate to move ahead with the modernizations of its Rivera Beach and Cape Canaveral power plants. So you had said that the rate filing was necessary to do this work. Since you're moving ahead anyway, does that say that your rate request was too high?
We decided to go ahead really for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a very compelling case from the customer's perspective, right? It makes a lot of sense in terms of the savings that it will generate. We also made commitments to the community here, the community in Brevard County that serves where Cape Canaveral is located. And frankly, it's been part of our core strategy is to make those kinds of investments. Insofar as how the rate case decision affected our thinking, we still believe that the return on equity that we got, or the return we provide people who buy our stock, our shareholders, we don't think that 10% is really represents that true cost. But these are long-term investments, and there's a little bit in here that I believe that over the long term our investors will earn really what we think is the proper return on equity for those investments. So there's a piece of the thought process that's really with an expectation that over the long run we'll be able to earn a reasonable return on equity in these investments.
So it still makes sense financially, even though
Still
you
makes
didn't,
sense.
even though you did not.
Still makes sense financially for the customers, for sure. I really don't want to speak necessarily for shareholders who have lots of options where they put their money, but I think what we've been telling our investors is that Florida has had a constructive regulatory environment for a long time with great results, and that over the long term, that constructive environment will continue to be in place.
Does that mean you expect to get better rate increases soon from a new PSC?
No, don't read that necessarily into it. It just says that over the long term, and remember, these return equities will change over time, right? So this is not a number that's cast in concrete. As economic conditions improve or get worse, that return on equity could go up or down, which is why you have rate cases, to keep resetting it. But we're saying over the long term, over the life of this asset, we're going to be able to earn adequate returns to support that investment.
Is that why the company opposed the two appointees that were pulled back by the legislature?
You know, we've been very careful to say not to wade into the political process or the appointment process publicly to make comments about, how we think the process is or make any specific references to commission appointments. Frankly, what we do hope comes out of all this is that we have sort of a balanced regulatory environment that takes the needs of the customers as well as the needs of the companies, which frankly in the long term should benefit the customers. And I think our story is a good example of that. I found interesting over the weekend I read the AARP letter about PSC appointments, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of what they said in the letter. They talked about balance. They talked about having a PSC that understands Florida, understands regulatory policy, that they have a vision for the future for the state and the energy needs of the state. I think they made a reference about being fair and just as importantly perceived as being fair. And you know what? I agree with all that. I don't necessarily agree. There was also a comment about abuse of power by big companies on the consumer, and I totally understand where that comment comes from. But I think in our case, again, in my mind, the proof is, what kind of bills do our customers pay? If you're our customer, you pay the lowest bills in the state of Florida. So I don't know how you could say that we have abused our customers. And if I look at the reliability that we provide our customers, I think it's the same thing. It's one of the best in the U.S., better than the U.S. average.
Along those lines, why don't you want to tell the Public Service Commission which former staff members of the Public Service Commission you've hired?
Well, we get requests from the Commission for information all the time. And generally when we get requests for information, there is a regulatory or a legal reason behind the request. And in this particular case, this is a really narrow area of the law, right? Regulatory, administrative law. There's a finite number of people who really understand and really have the experience. And guess what? They all come from the Commission. And these people work not just at FPL and the other investor-owned utilities. These people, if you look at the prior experience of people in the Office of Public Counsel, in the legislature, in law firms that represent interveners in rate cases, such as the Florida Retail Federation or the South Florida Hospital Association, a lot of these are people who served at the PSC before. And, we found it odd that the legal or the regulatory reason for it wasn't stated. And secondly, that, none of these other parties that have people with prior commission experience were asked for the same information. It only went to the investor-owned utilities. So we wanted to get some clarification.
But the companies are the ones that are asking for the rate increase.
We're not asking for a rate increase now.
Well.
The rate case is over, right? So
Not over yet? You said it's not over.
Well, the petition for reconsideration is on a pretty narrow point. So we said, look, we'd like to know, a little more about what's being asked. Listen, at the end of the day, it's no big surprise. Everybody knows who's involved in these cases. They're public. You go before the commission. They know who's worked at this commission before. There's no big revelation on that. But we thought it was important to try to establish what is the background behind it. And frankly, been puzzled why nobody else that uses, no other entity that uses people with commission experience has been asked.
Would it be in the company's interests after all of the, shall we say, bad publicity from last year to just go ahead and say, if there really isn't a big deal and if this isn't a surprise given the narrow skill set here, to just go ahead and comply?
We may at some point in time. We'd like to see what the response is.
We've asked readers to forward some questions. One wants to know if you've had any contact with Lake Worth about taking over their electrical system.
I have not had any contact with Lake Worth. I'm not even sure if we've had any discussion. Pam Rauch is our Vice President of External Affairs, and she is kind of responsible for our relationships with all the cities and municipalities. And before I put my foot in it, I'm just going to want to get confirmation from her. Have you had any recent discussions with Lake Worth?
Not formally, but our area managers, in the course of business, talk with all the cities in and outside of our service territory. So there may be informal discussions about what they're doing. Obviously, they voted to not extend their power purchase agreement with FMPA. So I think naturally their staff have been questioning what their options are, but there's been no formal discussions.
I should just say that we don't have a strategy to grow by acquiring these municipal systems. They're hard to do. It's very difficult to do because they have a lot of contractual obligations, systems that in some cases operate in Lake Worth, and I'm not sure where they are, but they made a decision to operate at a different voltage than FPL or really any of the other investor-owned utilities. I don't think there's anybody in the state that operates in those voltages.
Lake Worth is unique in many ways.
Yeah, so it makes it really hard to do. And so, look, we're open to talking to them, but it's something that we have to get asked. It's not something that we're going to seek and get in the middle of what's essentially a local issue.
You mentioned that the new plant in the western Palm Beach County area will have some huge environmental benefits. One of our readers who lives in the acreage where there's a cancer cluster is concerned about any potential environmental hazards. Can you address that for readers who live out there in that area?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think that when you look at the only hazard that you can see from a site like that, you say, well, there are some incremental emissions, but recognize that those emissions, that were not in that area before, but recognize that those emissions are less than whatever facility that they are being displaced. And so I would say that I would be more worried about the traffic on I-95 and the emissions, the carbon emissions that we all inhale as we go up and down 95 than I would be with the emissions from any of these new combined cycle plants at West County or down in Miami at Turkey Point 5. It's the cleanest technology. It's the latest, cleanest technology available.
Can you give us an
now,
update
can I put a plug in for solar?
Sure, and then there's one actually second part of that question, I think.
Now, if you want to have no emissions at all, then solar and nuclear are really the way to go.
With regard to the people in the acreage, they might want to hear you address anything with regard to water, since that seems to be an issue of the moment.
And the specific question
is there any water issue from some of the discharge or what you use to cool the plant or anything? Right.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of any water issues. I think that uses recycled water or will be using recycled water eventually. So in my mind, that's sort of a net benefit for the environment. It's not taking water away, potable water away from people, nor is that water going back into the potable water system. So I would say no.
And that starts about a year from now, you said?
It will start about a year, exactly.
Okay.
We expect that it will go in service in June of 2011.
Okay.
Can you give us an update on the layoffs? Do you have any numbers? Are the layoffs still going on?
Sure. It's the numbers have played out roughly, and don't hold me to the exact body count, but just to be responsive, I'll give you kind of a general. We announced this back in April, and there were really two components. One component was an early retirement offer, of which roughly, consistent with kind of our numbers, about 170 employees, opted for the early retirement offer. And then we, last week, severance roughly 230 employees. And that includes about 80 union employees that already knew that their jobs were being discontinued, but that they're part of the 230. So net, there are about 400 employees that were affected, either retirement or severance, and there are about 100 or so positions that we said were still going to be filled. It's either reskilling, there's a change in something, primarily in the IT area, by the way. That's probably the biggest area where we're going to have some hires. And so net, we're looking at a reduction of about 300 positions. Those are hard to do. And you guys know this. You've been through it in here several times. And every time you do one of these, you hope you never have to do another one. But, for lots of reasons, we tightened our belt this year. We looked hard at, some of the functions. A good chunk of this is related to new construction. We've been laying off contractors. We used a lot of contractors for new construction work. And we kept looking to see, would things turn around, and how quickly would they turn around? Because there's a lot of knowledge and experience of these people who are being let go. And we finally came to the recognition that, we didn't think we're going to see huge customer growth in Florida anytime soon. We think all indications are that this is going to be a slow, painful recovery. And frankly, we concluded we had too many people involved in what I call the construction machine, even after we laid off a lot of contractors. At one point we had over 700 contractors working on new construction. And we're now probably, the last time I looked, we had less than 50 people in what I call general construction work. So,
like contractors, are those employees or are these outside companies?
No, outside contractors, outside vendors that did construction for us. Virtually all of these were doing field construction.
700 people or 700 companies?
700 people. I think the number was like 720 at the beginning of 2009. So at the end of the day, we're sort of sizing the company for what we believe is the right kind of ongoing level of construction. This should have no impact on reliability or what the level of the service that customers get. It is primarily, it's either what I would call construction related in one shape or another, or there's a little bit of staff support associated with that. So there are staff people that are part of this.
So what's the bottom line? How much money does reducing by 300 positions save the company each year?
We have not said that publicly at this point, and I'm going
to care to say it now.
No, you know why? In this environment, it becomes a financial disclosure event because it's something we haven't said to the shareholders. When it's all said and done, we will issue a number, but I want to do it kind of in a more orchestrated.
You know about when that might come?
The process will probably take up, because the union component doesn't finish until September. It will be kind of at the end of the third quarter before it's all.
The layoffs won't be completed until September?
I'm going to answer you in more detail than you probably want, because I don't want you to think I'm being argumentative.
So the layoffs are
the non-union piece will be done in 45 days. The union piece, the way the process works, you discontinue a job, and then it goes through a cycle of seniority, so that sort of the last hire, if they're willing to move, will. Said simply, the last hire will probably be the one to go out, but the way the process has to play out, people can kind of bump each other, like the airlines, right? If you're familiar with that process. And we think that process will take a couple of months to play out, which is what I'm saying, probably 2 to 3 months to play out, which is
So you
probably
think sometime
be
in September you'll make your disclosure to the shareholders
Right,
about what the
yeah.
financial will be.
Sorry, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say it since we haven't said it publicly before.
What can you say geographically about the distribution of the positions?
Yeah, it fits roughly in line with kind of our customer footprint. So about 2/3 of our customers are in Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade County, and roughly 2/3 of these workforce reductions are in this tri-county area. Possibly a tad higher, not much more.
You've been the subject of a remarkable string of employee memos accusing top executives of fraud, misleading the public, and possibly some other crimes. Do you believe these letters are from legitimate sources within the company with legitimate gripes?
I don't know who wrote the letters. I'd like to believe that they're written by people who are genuinely concerned about the company and the well-being of the company. As you probably know, there were 2 prior anonymous letters that were written. Those letters, there were a number of allegations about illegal and fraudulent behavior by several people in senior management. They were sort of thoroughly investigated by both the company and the board of directors, the audit committee of the board of directors. They brought in an outside law firm, forensic accountants, looking for, and by the way, the letters didn't provide any specific evidence to support the allegations. Nevertheless, there was a pretty extensive investigation. The board found no evidence to corroborate any of those allegations. The board and the company put in place really mechanisms for people to report anonymously, both through a third party that you can call in anonymously and provide the information, also through directly with a compliance officer of the company, or thirdly, directly to any member of the audit committee of the board. No such information was brought forward. Those processes remain in place. This third letter is essentially the same allegations as were before, and company, unless there's specific corroboration, specific supported data, the company not going to investigate something that's been investigated before several times. I found interesting, I saw this morning a posting from the Public Service Commission staff. I don't know if you have seen that or not, that addresses some of the allegations in the letter. And if you haven't seen it, I just referred you to that tries to put that, at least the view of the PSC staff on some of the challenges and the charges and the allegations, unsupported allegations.
Well, this obviously puts you in a very difficult position because these are publicly vented internal rumblings. Mm-hmm. Other than what you've done, I mean, how do you deal with this? Do you have any kind of appeal you would make to the employees?
Well, I think if you believe that there's been something that's either fraudulent or illegal that's gone on, and you have the information, we have these channels in place. And I can assure you that I'm certainly not going to know who the person is. That's the only way that the process can work, is you have to come forward and report it, and I guarantee your anonymity will be protected. Of course, it's hard to tell whether they really, going back to the original premise of your question, whether they believe that something inappropriate or not was going on.
As you know, the U.S. House has passed an energy bill with a cap-and-trade provision regarding greenhouse gases. The Senate has not taken any action, was trying to take action before July 4th, but didn't. I wonder if you could answer this question in two parts. One, what is FPL's position on the cap-and-trade bill that passed the House and anything that might pop up in the Senate that's similar? And second, given how controversial cap-and-trade has been to some people, what do you think cap-and-trade, a carbon emission policy, would mean to your company and to your company's customers?
Thank you. That's a great question. We spent a lot of time talking about energy policy. Just as a preamble, remember, we make decisions of putting assets in the ground that are going to last for 40 years. Right? That's kind of in this business. We spent a lot of capital with an expectation that our customers will benefit from those investments over a very long period of time. So we believe that there is a cost associated with carbon, and the byproduct of any fossil generation, byproduct of us driving our cars to and from work and around. And so when you're making those decisions, you want to make sure that you factor in kind of the true cost, the true cost of ownership of those assets. And I think you also know that we have been strong believers in doing whatever we can as a society to address climate change and potential climate change. So we have been supportive of anything that puts a price on carbon, that reflects kind of the true cost, because if we do nothing, eventually we're going to have to do something with carbon. There is a cost, and people who say that let's not do it, we believe that over the long term there will be a societal cost for not addressing carbon emissions. So we support, is the Kerry-Lieberman bill exactly what we would have, is exactly what we would have proposed? Maybe not, but we've supported it. We think it's a step in the right direction. And we're hopeful that something will happen in the Senate. Not sure the votes are going to be there. Most people that are more involved in the politics of that tell me the chances are not particularly good. But we think ultimately we should have it. How do Florida customers should do? Well, hopefully we can come out of this with legislation that does not penalize our company or our customers for having taken early action. Because we've been working on cleaning our environmental profile for a long time. And so, our fear is we don't want to subsidize areas of the country where they have a lot of coal and generating a lot of carbon dioxide.
Midwest, primarily.
Primarily the Midwest. And so we hope our customers don't get hurt by that. I hope our customers really benefit from the investments that we have made and which, frankly, our customers have paid for over the years. So, kind of summarizing, we think it's the right policy, right public policy for our country. We believe strongly that there should be a price on carbon. And, we're very actively engaged in the political process to make sure that our customers, I wouldn't say benefit, but certainly are not harmed by this legislation.
Right. So how might that cost go from the legislation to Florida Power and Light and then to the customers?
Yeah, it will ultimately follow, and I'm going to make numbers up just to make the point. So there will be a tax, effectively a carbon tax, whether it's cap and trade or a tax. Economically, it's the same thing. It's a charge for carbon. Now, most of the legislation starts you off with an allowance that says you are allowed to generate so many tons of carbon.
You as a utility.
As a utility, and our customers, really. It's for the retail end of the business. So we and our customers would be given an allocation for carbon, and that allocation goes down every year. So we would get, again, it's not good right numbers, you get 1,000 tons of carbon, and as long as you are and you get that for free. If you go above that, you have to go out and buy it. So it's a tax, and that cost will get passed on to your customers. On the other hand, if you don't use it all, you can turn around and sell those credits to somebody who needs it, hopefully the guys in the Midwest who have to buy it, and our customers will benefit from those credits. And over time, you keep making investments so that you could keep lowering your carbon emissions, so that hopefully, you hit kind of that sweet spot where it has minimal or no impact, or maybe even a beneficial impact on your customers' bills over the long term.
And it would,
Please go ahead.
Another question on the rate case. There's going to be it's either going to be a limited scope proceeding on West County 3 or filing a full revenue requirements rate case. So can we tell people, is that going to be by the end of this year? Early next
We haven't
year?
decided when it's going to be. It's very unlikely that it would be by the end of this year. But I think sometime between now and beginning of 2013, we need to get cost recovery for that. And sorry if I'm being evasive. We really haven't decided. I mean, we need to see how all these things play out, particularly the petition for reconsideration, and frankly have a little bit better view of the economy, because that also drives how much revenue you get in the door.
Has what happened in the Gulf caused you to ask your engineers to reassess or reexamine the safety assumptions that they have made about nuclear power or about pipelines?
It's a great question. Anybody who's got a lot of iron in the ground, like we do, you have to ask yourself. I don't think every day I ask myself that question. Right? Is there anything we're overlooking for the way that we look at our business? And I will tell you, on the nuclear side, the nuclear industry, and maybe this is not a perfect analogy, but the nuclear industry had its own sort of equivalent of a BP oil spill with 3 Mile Island. And, when, as a result of 3 Mile Island, a lot of things changed for the nuclear industry in our country. One is you have a very active Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I mean, these plants, if you operate a nuclear plant, you have Nuclear Regulatory Commission people on staff around the clock every day. More importantly, and I'm sure you guys did the same thing, when you look at when all the CEOs of these oil companies were testifying in Congress, and they were saying, well, we wouldn't have done it this way, we wouldn't have done it this way. That is virtually impossible to happen in our industry. After 3 Mile Island, there was an organization created by the owners of nuclear operators. And it's essentially, you are sort of bound together. There was a recognition that the industry was as good as its weakest nuclear plant. And so they have put in place, this preceded even me, they put in place a whole process where these plants are reviewed for safety. All of their safety is really very thorough analysis of all their safety practices, operating practices. All the plants are rated. There is an understanding, and they all use the same processes. There's an understanding that the organization can shut your plant down. This is called INPO, by the way, Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And there's an understanding that if you, that this organization can shut your plant down, even before the regulators shut it down, if you're not operating the plant safely.
on how much notice?
They put you on sort of a period of probation, and you have a short, depending on the severity, they will tell you how quickly you have to fix the problem. One thing you'll find interesting, and that we get together routinely, a couple of times a year for sure, to talk about the safety problems of any nuclear plant in the U.S. And you find interesting, one of the first things you do when you become a CEO of a utility that's a nuclear operator is you go through this training on nuclear safety. And you quickly learn that safety above all, and that your peers can have huge influence in the operation of these plants. So this is a very long answer for your question, but I do ask myself that, not just on I think nuclear would be the one that would have the biggest consequences, but really in every aspect of our operations. But I do take comfort in the nuclear plants. I think it's a different structure. The industry plays a far greater role in nuclear safety than I think we have seen. And frankly, I don't know any more than you do about oil exploration in terms of, it's all what I read in the paper and in the media. But I just don't see the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who is very, very actively engaged with very, very direct involvement in day-to-day operations.
So are you saying that in an ironic way, 3 Mile Island was good for the industry?
I don't know that I would want to say that it was good for the industry, but I think there were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of lessons applied, and I think our industry learned that they had to do things in a different way after 3 Mile Island, and they have.
Some of the people who are strong advocates of nuclear power, I guess, would say that it was an overreaction, right? Since we haven't really had one built in 30 years.
I would not say that. I would not say that the safety measures that have been in place and the organizational things that have been done have been an overreaction. I think they've been appropriate. And frankly, I think if the industry has not done a good job is really convincing the public that nuclear is safe. And that when you look at all of the alternatives that we have to maintain our lifestyle, nuclear and renewable are the best sources we have for emissions-free generation. Getting the signal.
Could we just wrap up? This will bring us full circle from the last meeting. And when you came at the end of last year, as you say, you were, I would think it'd be fair to say, somewhat apologetic about what the company had gone through, and you talked a lot about the company's reputation and image after some of the controversy leading up to and through the rate hearing. How would you say FPL is looking these days?
Well, I would say that, we've had our share of bruises. No question that the outcome of the rate case was not what we had hoped, or that what we thought necessarily was ultimately in the best interest of our customers. And right now, it's hard to be overly positive when you're just in the middle of a workforce reduction. So we still are adjusting to, it's not just the regulatory outcome, but also, frankly, an economic downturn, a very severe economic downturn. But I think we all hold our heads high, and we're proud of our record. And, I'll put our record next to anybody's in terms of, and I think what people care about is, am I getting good value for what I'm paying this company? And I look at your bill, and you have the lowest rates in the state of Florida. So I'm proud that we've been able to deliver on that. While we're not perfect on reliability, we have one of the best reliability records in the state, better than the national average. So we're proud of what we have been able to accomplish. And hopefully that pride is also mixed in with a little humility and a recognition that we can always do better.
Thank you for coming to the Palm Beach Post, Mr. Olivera. See you again soon.
So are we off now?
It's not so bad.